Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Pod Save the Youth. I'm your host, David Seaton.
I'm Markus.
And today we're going to be talking all about the process of running for office as a young candidate. And today we are so excited to be joined by two incredible guests, and I will let them introduce themselves right now. Angus, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'm Angus Abercrombie. I'm from Belmont, Massachusetts, and I'm running for school committee. I'm already an elected member of the town legislature, but in New England, that's not a high bar.
Hey, I'm Josh Thompson. I'm originally from Hendersonville, North Carolina, but lived in I think I lived in every state on that map there on the East Coast behind you, David. But spent a ton of time growing up in Newark. But New York City has been home for quite some time. And yeah, I'm not young anymore. But when I was young, I did run for office, ran for mayor of New York City.
All right. Well, we are so happy again to be inviting all of you onto the podcast today. As we know here, the number of Gen Z candidates is rising across the country for municipal, congressional, and national elections. But that's not always represented in the media. Right now, we see two candidates at the very top of the ticket who do not represent our generation, who are incredibly old compared to the median age of the American population. And I think that this turns a lot of young people off. As we see, roughly 1 in 7 young people have joined a protest in the United States, are politically active, but only 40% of young people feel qualified to participate in politics. And that's according to a Tufts Circle poll. And only 10% of youth have actually ever considered running for office. And that's concerning because, if we're the generation that is growing, if we are comprising the electorate, the largest percentage of the electorate in upcoming years, and we're not running for office, we're going to increasingly see this lack of representation in local, state, and national offices if we're not filling those positions early and often. How did you first decide to run for office, Josh and Angus?
So a lot of my friends, I'm a millennial, were coming to me with some of these similar statistics. And they're just like, man, like, who's going to do this, right? Like in any kind of office, who's going to start this wave? And like, where do we start? It takes such a long time to do the typical thing, school board, city council, and then maybe Congress. And none of that kind of made sense to me because like those are all very different things. Like, what do you actually care about? And what are you willing to put your reputation on the line as opposed to say, this is the ladder I need to climb? And dozens and dozens and dozens, then turned into hundreds of millennials back then, showing me the statistics, specifically in New York City, that there's 3.4 million registered Democratic voters. And I think all of us know on this, like, it's not easy to register to vote, right? You got to show up, you got to fill it out. You either got to hit submit or lick it and stamp it and put it in. Like you wanted to participate. And then I looked at the number. I was like, there's 3.4 million Democrats. And the person winning the primary is getting on average 220,000 to 250,000. That's a massive drop off. And started asking them, like, why are we dropping off? Why are we dropping off? And it's like, well, look at the candidates. None of them are representative of our passions or our age. So why would I show up? And that's when I had the brilliant idea to say, well, shoot, let's do this. And also there's a big motivation fact that I also want to admit that was not a healthy reason. There were some healthy reasons I decided to run for office. One unhealthy one was I was angry at the current mayor and I was running against something. And now I know it's so much better to be running for something. So there was that component to it.
Yeah, I mean, my story is a little bit different just in how blurry the line can get between public office and not being in public office in New England. We have a unique form of government for our towns, and I happen to live in one of a handful of representative town meeting communities. Now, if you go back to it pains me that explaining this story requires this much context, but you cannot understand New England politics without it. You go back to like the Pilgrims coming over and the early settlements. They all gathered the whole town in these halls to make decisions about the future of their community. Now, we still do that in a lot of towns in Massachusetts and New England at large, and it's called a town meeting. The ideal of a town meeting is everyone in a community. Belmont doesn't have a big enough room for everyone in the community. So instead of inviting all of our registered voters, we have a representative body. It's 288 elected members. That's more than 1% of our town is elected to this body. And under campaign finance law, we're not even elected officials. We're not subject to the same public records or ethics rules. So if you want to bribe a town meeting member, I'm not saying you should do it. I'm just saying you might be able to get away with it.
It's a possibility.
But, that blurred line made it really easy for me to say, hold on, I've been doing this my whole life, right? I've always been that nerd who reads up on the policy. My friend has a question about why their grade was the way it was, and they wanted to get it changed, or they wanted to know more about how our school handled harassment, or whatever it was. Or my neighbor had an issue with permitting, and I was the guy who spent too much of his time reading zoning laws. That is who I was from an early age. And so when I turned 18, it was the next natural step was to become one of these people who fills that role and carries on that legacy of the community coming together to make decisions. Now, as a town meeting member, I started seeing much more closely the political culture of my community and just how extensive the lack of urgency is. When we're cutting services in our schools every year, when we are struggling to find funds without forcing our seniors and our renters to essentially leave town because they can't afford increasing property taxes or what that means for their rental bill, that is really tough. And when you look at that and you see your elected officials not acting with urgency, when you see them sending things back for another study or another committee, when you know it's a good idea, everyone knows it's a good idea, and all it takes is a few positive votes and it's there and we can start using that tool. That was really what inspired me to go after a school committee seat, because I wanted to make sure that not only was that younger perspective represented when we make decisions about the schools, but also as someone who doesn't have a background in education, I've been an advocate, I've been on campaigns, and the work I do is about moving policy forward. So I apologize for how much context there was in that explanation. It really doesn't work without it, but that's why I ran the first time and why I'm running this time.
It's thanks for that background. I didn't know the whole pilgrim background in that sense, but
the pilgrims.
I gotta say, it drives me crazy. And maybe this is intentional what you said. When people say, specifically young people, say, I don't have a background in education, but I'm running for school board. You have all the fucking background in education. You just went through how many years and years and years of actually having the consuming the actual product that you're going to serve. But I mean, I get the mindset why someone does it, and maybe it's your humbleness of saying, I don't have a PhD in education, but yeah, I just have to think that you all at that age arguably are the most have the most background in education.
I mean, it's certainly something we're talking about, issues like AI, social media, and the impacts of a pandemic, right? We need people on our school committee who have experienced what those do to a classroom. And since the last educator was voted off of the school committee, we don't have that.
Yeah.
So that's something I'm really trying to bring back.
That's cool.
And Markus, maybe you can speak to this too as a fellow elected official.
Yeah, what do you know about this?
Like everybody said, running for office at a young age is, oh my God, it's a crazy thing. You sometimes, I think you have to get used to walking in a room and bringing down the age gap by 20, 25 years. I've definitely done that in a lot of rooms I've gone into at a young age. But when I ran for my local school board, I first had to learn just how complex and how a lot of the stuff that school board members do, they don't actually have a lot of control over. Individually, as individual members, in order to get anything done in office, you need a majority. You need 3 votes in Arizona. You need 3 votes on a school board to get reform mental health policies, creating a climate action plan, creating a subcommittee, approving a superintendent. Those are all the things that I don't think a lot of people understand. I think as we see in our society, I think there's been such a lack of I don't want to say awareness from the community, but just a lack of public officials not making their constituents aware of what their offices actually do and how they can utilize the resources. And that's kind of the reason why I ran, because I wanted to inform the community as to like, I'm a young guy running for office, but like we are a school board, and since I've gotten on the board, a lot of more people are more aware as to exactly what the local school board does, because all the attention that has come along with me getting elected to it has brought to the district. So that's one thing I really am passionate about, just ensuring that people have the knowledge and resources.
That's such a jumping off point. Like you said, like you being representative made people become more aware of it. And it was a different thing. I was the community and city's worst nightmare twice. So I was appointed at the age of 26 by the governor as a state takeover to take over the Board of Education in Bridgeport, which was always an elected thing. So imagine me at 26, not from there, being appointed and dropped right in the middle of that. And I was the youngest person on that board by, I don't know, 35 years. And then in Washington, D.C., prior to that, I was the same thing. I was the liaison between President Obama's office and the mayor's office, and talk about a baptism in bureaucracy. I was the liaison between the state superintendent and the District of Columbia. How do you have a state superintendent in a district? And then there was the chancellor of schools, and then there was the deputy mayor of education, and then there was the DC chancellor. So like but I was appointed to oversee all these things. But the point being was the thing I did in each one of those, one of the few things I think I did that was right, was an affect what you just said. I was there saying, I do have some strong opinions, and I do think I will get some like fundamentals done, but I'm literally here to be used. Like, I'm not going to be here for a long time. This is what's at stake. This is what we can actually, like, please tell me what to do. And like, let's inform each other, but then you inform me of what to do. But yeah, it was a flashback of you all running for something. And then I, for a while, was like the enemy because I was the appointed one.
Yeah, I think, every time I turn the microphone on the DS, somebody's eyes are gonna roll, or somebody's gonna put their head back. Like, oh god. The administrator's gonna get pissed just by asking if I ask a question.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I also want to get to the logistics of actually running a campaign as a young person. So roughly 60% in recent polls of young people who are considering running for office say that the cost of running a campaign is just too much right now, that it's prohibitive. How have you all approached the problem of having to fundraise as a young candidate that doesn't have a huge backing to start your political careers? And how have you solved that problem going into your races and winning successfully?
Like, I can take us off. Start at this one because I've been deep in the fundraising for months and months and months, and we raised. So that we've got 3 candidates in our race: one incumbent who's doing almost nothing and is probably going to get on anyway, and then it's really just me and another candidate for that second seat. Now we've raised about the same amount of money. I raised it with 3 times as many contributors, almost 4. And that is one of the big keys, right? You have to be deeply engaged in your community in order to usurp that kind of baseline level of support that someone coming in, seeming qualified, subscribing to that kind of regular order of how things are done in municipal politics, especially, to what they can raise. And, we brought in that money from across the country. I have contributions from my friend's mom in Florida, but we also have a lot that came in through just being involved in political institutions in Belmont, in Massachusetts. And I think that's one of the keys. I get asked a lot about by people who are considering running for office, who are young, and I say to them, do you think you can raise this money? Because if you don't think you can raise the money, it's not going to go well. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't run for office. That means that you need to build your network. And you can build a network in politics really quickly. There are a lot of people, a lot of Democratic Party institutions especially, who couldn't be more excited to see and elevate a young person participating. I was made a full member of the Belmont Democratic Town Committee within about a year of showing up to my first meeting. I was elected a delegate
Same here.
to the convention when I was 17,
We love the
despite
BTCs.
supporting a candidate for governor who almost no one on the committee supported. And, it's really just, you show up as a young person and there are people waiting to get to know you and support you, but you have to do that work first instead of just coming in and saying, it's about me, I'm running for office. Because even if you have the best of intentions, when people don't know who you are, when they haven't seen your work, and when you haven't, I guess, proven yourself to a degree that honestly you shouldn't have to. I think we should have a higher expectation for what young people are capable of. But the sad truth is that we don't. And so unless you have the network of people who understand what sets you apart and your level of interest and what you bring to the table, you are going to really struggle to explain to voters that you're there to do the real work, the hard work, and improve things for everyone in your community.
Yeah, how did what I overcome the fundraising blockade?
And also, how did you overcome being a young person and giving up time out of a time in your life where you have to work constantly to make ends meet? How did you give up that time and also work to build the fundraising network needed to support your campaign?
Yeah, I gotta tell a humbling. So this will be the first time I tell this story in a public sense. So let's memorialize it because it was very humbling and wasn't one of the best moments of my life. But on the front end, before I get there, I was super blessed just in terms of being able to have the network at that time, because that was a big question I asked myself of, I now invest in a bunch of startup companies and things. And it's like, if you ask a founder, do you think you're going to be able to raise this next round? And they waffle, like, you're not going to invest in their company, right? And I know that there's a lot of blockades to certain folks getting networks, but I loved, Angus, what you said, that there's so many existing networks that are actually waiting for someone's or someone. I think that's a big misnomer. But a huge motivation for me was, right, from a young age and just my career, right? I was blessed to know Cory Booker for a very long time and serve him and his network just being absolutely tremendous. But like I always tell people, it's one thing to know people. I now see it, love it. It's one thing to know people. It's another thing for people to know you. And kind of to Angus's point, it was like when we decided to run for mayor. And I want to really drive that point home. When we ran, I had people out there telling our and my story that were going to be my commissioner of police, the chancellor of education. Our whole platform was like, I don't need a transition time to find who's going to help me run the city. Like, I know who I'm doing it with. And if they're not willing to attach themselves to this platform and actually be evangelists for my and our story, then you're starting well behind. But had a blessing from a lot of like Cory's rise. I worked a long time at the Jackie Robinson Foundation, the first family in the United States, in my opinion, in America, and having access to that, and then serving other mayors and networks. But again, I knew people, but they believed in me. Like, they got to know me, and I was able to take that out. And a huge motivation of mine in running for office was a ton of young people helped me. And I was like, cool, come along on this. One, I need you to win, but two, come take my network. Like, get in, meet my folks, meet these donors, and like use that for your platform too. Because I know you want to run for office. So like call on our behalf, get to know them, and then run for city council because I know you want to. And yeah, this was a shitty day. We were really picking up a ton of traction. It was a day I will never forget. And we hit a fundraising threshold that the campaign manager came back and said, hey, we unlocked the coffers that, Vanity Fair is going to do a piece now, and GQ is going to, because, there's that behind the scene media thing of like, until you hit fundraising thresholds, we're not going to take you serious. But I looked at him and I said, we don't have enough to win. Like, there's just no way that we are. And he said, yeah, but we did the thing that you can get all the publicity. And I said, I'm not motivated to keep taking people's money if we're not going to win. And I know the game. You're supposed to, even if you don't win, raise your profile so you can do it easier the next time. But I was like, I'm not in it. I was talking about one and done. I meant it. I was like, I'm doing it this time. I'm not doing it again. And that gave us the freedom. And he said, well, why are you bumming? What are you going to do? Just stop? And I said, yeah, brother, I have to. I literally can't make rent. I had to volunteer at my job because I loved my job, but the job didn't want the political risk of me running for office and getting compensated from them. It was a very high profile nonprofit that had multiple contracts with the Department of Education. So there was de Blasio, crossover. So yeah, I couldn't keep it up. And so I said, what am I going to do? Like live off of a Vanity Fair article? That's not going to pay my rent, right? So it was a moment that I just remember. I was like, we gotta call it, and let's take the funds that we have and distribute it to some of the causes that we're running on. So we offered everyone their money back. They didn't take it, and we put it back out into the field of the causes that we were supporting. So yes, it has a tremendous impact.
Yeah.
Just want to echo what you both just said. That is, I think, the number one question that any young person asks themselves is, first of all, if they run for office at the age of 18 or even 19, first of all, are my parents going to be okay with it? Or my parent or guardian, are they going to be okay with it? Second question is, are my people that are in my circle going to be okay with it? And then how can I use that circle to help me out with this campaign? So those are, I think, the two questions that people really have to ask themselves when they consider running for office, especially at a young age. Because when I ran for office, I didn't really tell a lot of my high school friends or high school people. I didn't tell my teachers. They actually didn't find out until my signs went up, my street signs went up. Once my street signs went up, then people started asking around and saying, well, a principal found out, like, Markus in a school board. I was like, yeah, surprise. But that's just like that sense of, also like that sense of feeling a barrier when I'm the second youngest person in the office in my entire area. Is like 39, 38. So like that sense of like urgency, feeling that barrier that you're carrying for an entire generation is just, it is, not only is it financially hard as a young person, but it also just like emotionally and mentally hard to run for office as a young person, because you're being looked at, you're being held to such a higher standard simply because of two numbers that are next to your name, which is your age. And it is hard, but I had the support of my parents, my family. I still live with my parents. So obviously they understood what I was doing. I was being crazy, going outside, knocking on doors. And so it is hard, and if even if you don't have those support systems, what if there is a young person out there that doesn't have those support systems, but they truly are passionate? What do we do for those people? And that's why organizations are so important to support young people running for office. And we see very many of those in just any space for young people.
It's funny how your friends react. A former guest on this podcast, Nate Lubin, was my neighbor. And when he found out, he literally came knock on my door and he was like, what the fuck are you thinking? This is the dumbest idea ever. I was like, so you want to join the campaign? Anyway, he helps.
Yeah. Well, I think that economic perspective and those economic struggles that young candidates face are also really important when a young person is actually in office once they get elected, because too few people in our current government in our state in Massachusetts, I know Angus and I know this well, are not millionaires. And across the country, there are poor populations or young populations are greatly underrepresented in all aspects of government. So that youth perspective of struggling economically, of having to work your way up in a campaign, is so valuable once you actually get to the office that you are running for. Right now in our country, young people really disapprove of our economy. We see that roughly only 20% of young people actually have a positive opinion of our economy, even though despite the massive economic recovery that we've seen post-COVID. And this is primarily driven by high housing costs in the wake of the pandemic. And I'm wondering, like, Josh, I know New York City has a major housing crisis. How are young candidates viewing this crisis differently, and what solutions maybe are you seeing from young candidates or young elected officials rather on the city council to tackle this crisis from a different perspective?
Great question, but yeah, we did New York City. I rarely say this. We had one of our greatest failed moments recently, and it was about what we failed to do for young folks and affordability. It was I didn't leave New York City. I didn't even blink when COVID happened. Never thought about leaving, and so many people did, and who got us through and recreated the startup industry and service industry and the creator economy were young folks coming in, because however you want to view it, but like they had a higher tolerance for risk. They came in the middle of COVID. They still wanted to come to New York City. They did such a service to our city and our government. Once the people came back, the millionaires came back, they came back from their Hamptons homes, they came back from all their vacation homes and said, well, you know, my city's doing good again, so I'm ready to come back. We didn't do a damn thing to rent stabilize or give tax incentives to the young folks that literally helped save and transform us during that time. It was one of the greatest missed opportunities that I really hope does not come back to bite us more. But yeah, I'm hoping to, you know, you saw a bit of things like, and I'm not sitting here promoting a company that I'm an investor in, but like Icon down in Austin, Texas, right, doing just transformational things around 3D printing and affordability. And you see the villages that we were meant to see down in that way, but really knowing that those kind of points and those kind of innovations can transform into a Chicago and a New York City. And yeah, I'm just doing everything I can in our generation for my peers and a little bit younger who are getting elected to ensure that they have access to this sometimes dirty term of public-private partnerships, of like, look what can be done with this public-private partnership in terms of affordability, ingenuity, creativity. So hoping a lot more of those kind of policies. But the long story short is, I think we're in a cool position. There's a kind of like a council of me and some friends that do either help invest or create different solutions. And the young elected officials reach out to us and say, like, educate us on this. Like, can we get tours of these facilities? What is this like? I want to learn more, because if I ever have the opportunity to actually pass something, I want to know it intimately. So that's been pretty cool to see, of young folks saying, I don't know what I don't know, and can we talk about it, which has been super cool.
Yeah, I think, you know, when we talk about the affordability question, there's this assumption that young people and, you know, older folks, seniors especially, experience the affordability crisis in different ways, especially at the suburban town level, which is where I operate. There's a lot of similarities in those impacts. I mean, the primary affordability issue for our seniors is the issue of property taxes.
Yeah.
And property taxes are high because the value of the home is high, and their income isn't high enough to cover what it costs to pay tax on that home. For a young person, the price of the home is high and our income isn't enough to cover what it takes to buy a home. It's a very similar baseline issue, and it also manifests in similar ways, and the solutions are similar. Things like zoning to create more walkable communities. You know how much a car costs to own and maintain? When you're running a grocery trip every week, I can't walk from my house to a grocery store in any reasonable time. Now, I still do, because I don't drive like a lot of young people, and that's its own barrier to running for office. But, you know, that is a half-hour walk if I'm not feeling my bike that day. That's not short, especially not with groceries. So, you know, but that's the exact same issue that my neighbor, you know, 2 doors down, who is in her 80s and, you know, has helpfully realized that she might not want to be on the road as much. That's the same issue she faces. You know, she can't walk to a grocery store. She can't drive to a grocery store. And so all of a sudden we lose that. But we're 5 minutes away, or 5-10 minutes walk away from a major commercial center in town.
Mm-hmm.
But half of those stores are vacant.
Mm-hmm.
because of the zoning we've got, because of the lack of
Yeah.
walkability, because we've surrounded it with a massive parking lot that no one wants to use or go into. These are the effects that we can fix with good zoning policy. These are the effects that we can fix with good public investment. And, you know, they'll solve affordability issues for young people and for our seniors, right? If people can live in housing that's the right size, instead of mandating that every property in most of our town be a large lot single family home, you know, you don't need 4 bedrooms if you're 1 or 2 people who like to share a bed. You don't need the other 3 bedrooms. And if you're, you know, a young person just entering the job market, you don't want 4 bedrooms in your own house either. You want a nice tight-knit community where you can, you know, be close to people and be close to amenities. So that is how we solve these affordability issues. We build the right size of housing. We build the commercial centers that are walkable and accessible for everyone. And that is going to help young people, but it also helps our seniors. And I think that's something that we kind of forget about when we talk about young people in politics, because it's so much about how do we make sure that young people are represented and young people's issues are supported. But it is all of the people on the margins that are being hurt by the same kinds of policy. And so often it's people on the margins who can all be helped by the same solutions.
Yeah, that's super important. I think that one thing I've seen at town meetings in Massachusetts in particular is that there is a lot of mistrust between older and younger generations on economic issues. And that's very unnecessary because, like, as you said, everyone is dealing with the affordability crisis. We're just dealing with it in different ways. Young people are having to pay rent that's far too high, and older people are having to pay property taxes that are far too high. It's the same thing. It's just a different side of the issue. And because of that, we're not building trust, but we're not building intergenerational trust that is actually able to solve some of these problems. But I want to talk about another major issue for young people as well: education. I know Angus and Markus. Markus, you currently serve on a school board, and Angus, you're running for a school board. What kind of perspectives are critical for young candidates to bring to school boards, and why is it important that young people run and eventually serve on school boards, as we are the generation that is closest to actually being in education and feeling the lived experience of students and of teachers today?
Yeah. So I think in short terms, it's just like we remember what textbooks were just in the classroom a year ago. We remember what equipment were in those classrooms. We remember what teachers and administrators are teaching at that school. And that's why we should be in the boardroom making decisions for those people that we were literally just with or are not currently with as our peers, whether it's in high school. That's one reason why young people should be on every school board in America, is because for far too long, I think education's always been about test scores, academic, you know, how best can somebody perform, and we've always seen students as just a number rather than seeing them for who they are. I think as time goes on, and really what COVID showed us is that education just in America is so broken. Public education in America is so broken, and it's something that really brought to light, but also there's an effort in America by billionaires and the right-wing part of the Republican Party to privatize education entirely, to where we have zero say in our education. And I think that's another thing that I think people, particularly working class families, are being lied to. You know, they're being sold that they have to go to a private school to get a better education. In all reality, that should not be the thing. Because here in Arizona, we actually are ground one for what is called an ESA voucher, which has been a nightmare for our fiscal budget. The state budget, the Arizona budget used to actually be they had a $1.2 billion surplus last legislative session. Now they have a $400 million deficit in their budget over 1 year. That is Arizona. That is Arizona. That's the Arizona Republican legislature. So now our crazy superintendent is going around saying that using public dollars to promote a private program. And it's like we're forgetting about over 90% of Arizonans choose their local neighborhood public schools. But we are not investing in them. And I think with more and more young people getting on school boards, it shows that we can actually make good policy decisions that can bring good progress to our communities, to show that public school districts can go back to what they used to be in the 70s and the 60s when there was no charter schools or private schools around. I think that's the crazy thing is like even this, like school districts are being thrown with so many different things. We not only are we trying to fix the teachers, find the teachers we don't have, find the staff we don't have, but we're also trying to build schools or redo schools with money we don't have. And then not only that, we're talking about housing. We are having to find out ways to actually build housing ourselves as a district to literally house those teachers. Because if you're in a more wealthier suburb area, which is where we are, the teachers who come to my district to teach can't afford to live in my district. They're making $50,000, where the average price of a home in my district is around $400,000. That's not sustainable. The average price of rent is $1,300 in my area. That's not sustainable. And in these systems, we're seeing private investors. I mean, this all goes back again to privatized corporations buying up housing markets, buying up units, pressuring young people to thinking that they're never going to be able to buy a home. They just rent their entire lives, and that you're never going to be able to own a home and ever build generational wealth or equity like how our parents or grandparents were able to do. And so it's this push just to privatize everything, I think, is just truly dismantling our entire public service systems that I think our grandparents have known their entire lives. And we are just, as young people, grappling with, wow, this is a lot to fucking handle. How are we going to be tasked and then try to fix a burning planet? And on top of that, it's a lot for us to go undertake. But that's why we have to step up and step into these spaces. We may not be as educated on these topics, but that's why we need resources and organizations there to help guide us. Going back to what Josh was saying earlier.
So I want to add a little something to that, because you're absolutely right, Markus, about the value of having recent experience in schools and knowing what our textbooks look like and who our teachers are and who all these people are, and having those relationships as well. But there's the second part to that, which is actually knowing how the rapidly changing technical landscape and how what's going on in the world in general is impacting our students in our classrooms. It's wild to me that we don't have any representation on so many school boards and school committees of people who've sat in a room and been asked to make a decision on, am I going to write this paper or am I going to stick the prompt into ChatGPT, right? Because when we're making policy about, okay, how do we tackle AI? How do we use it in the classroom? How do we avoid it being used when we don't want it used? And how do we equip our educators to know when it's being used, or to protect against its use, or to use it well? Those are questions that no one on the Belmont School Committee at the moment is equipped to answer, because they haven't been in the room. Now, I've been in those classrooms with students who are making decisions like, am I gonna use this technology? And then their educators turn around and use other technologies to identify it and mark them down. And frankly, the fact that we have no guidance in so many of these districts, Belmont included, on the use of AI just goes to show why it's so important to have those perspectives and young people on these boards and committees, because it just makes it keeps us up to date, right? It keeps us up to date on our priorities and on policy making. And when we don't have those assets, we aren't well educated. And if our only perspective on what's going on in the world of education comes from things that have been studied and peer reviewed, and there is a body of data that shows this is the correct action, well, great. Let's implement that and let's work on those priorities. At the same time, though, we need to start moving forward on issues that are emerging. We need to be responding effectively when we only have a basic understanding of the incentives that students are facing every day in the classroom and what they're dealing with. And we can't do that well when we don't know what students are thinking. Now, I'll note that in Massachusetts, we have to have student representatives present at school committee meetings.
I was going to ask. Okay.
But those student representatives are, you know, they're a great program, and it's really valuable, and they can do great work. But at the same time, there's a big difference between someone who is putting in the time to run for an office and serve in that elected office, and someone who is desperately trying to apply to college, and, you know, build out their future in a very different way. You know, the amount of time that someone like me, for instance, can put into being on a school committee, you know, I recognize the 3-year commitment and the amount of work that goes into these meetings and all of that. And I say, bring it on. But for so many students, you know, you're picking from a much smaller crowd, and it is really difficult to find people who can bring the level of policy background and that kind of experience, as well as time commitment. You know, frankly, everyone in a school district who is, especially a school district like Belmont, has so much pressure on them to do 15 different things with their life. And we just cannot ask that of our students and then ask them to show up to these meetings and contribute, you know, the kind of meaningful close reading of our budget and our policies that we want.
For sure. I've seen so many times that adults, mostly intentionally, set folks up for failure in that regard. Like they wait for that gotcha moment of like, you know, talk to me about this budget or do this, that. And, you know, majority of them don't even know what it is. And this is such a good conversation, y'all. And I have a question for you. And I know that we probably need to move forward, but it's thank God for being indemnified in my public service. I got sued so many times by different unions and other things. And the first one was when I appointed high school students to the school board. And when I spoke to them, I was like, listen, you do what you want, but I'd say for the first 3 months, can you be there where I can just literally ask you, is this shit true? Right? Because people were saying, this is happening, this is going on, we did. And I literally just would look like, I cede my time to the good junior on my left, right? Like, is this true? Right? And I was like, just be there to listen, validate. But I said, give me a couple months because I want to implement you into training around budget, truancy, busing, like all this stuff, right? So it was an amazing process. And one of the most impactful things was we created a committee of I wrote it into authority that there was a body elected within each high school, that the elected high school students were the ones that actually hired and fired the police that were within their halls. Because it was like, if you don't actually have a meaningful, trustful relationship with the people that are supposed to actually be making you feel safe and not interrogated or feeling militant, like that's literally the most precious asset. And ironically, the police union was wildly on board with it and actually loved it, because they were like, hey, like we want to be humanized too, and we want to do this. There were some rocky roads, but the question I have, and then moving forward, is do you all have mandatory trainings like on the board? Do you get provided resources to seek budget training or anything like that, or is that just kind of on your own?
So in Arizona, there's no law requiring school board members to take any training.
Why would you do continuous education on a school board? Why?
Why would you? So if you're a school board member, you can run on saying you want to shut down every school in your district, but if you get elected, the staff and the law does not require you to actually learn how school facilities actually operate in the state of Arizona. So you can literally, it is insane. In Arizona, there's no law requiring even 6 hours of training. Our state association offers like a day of training for you, like learn the basics, how to go through the budget, how to be a good member, how to sit there and be a good boy and listen to the superintendent. But I went out and got help from school board partners, Heal Together and Local Progress. They helped me a lot with policy training and understanding the crazy world of school board. But also going back into that is like, I remember going to my first school board meeting for my high school district, because in Arizona, school districts are divided between high school and elementaries are separate.
Yeah, I saw that.
So I went to my high school building and I was like, there's no students in here. I was like, why are there no students in my high school boardroom? What? So I'm still working on something with some of the board members there to bring student representatives to the board. I've been fighting for that the last year and a half on my own school board. Has been a nightmare. And it's like, like showing up to a boardroom and seeing no students. Guys, we are literally here making decisions for students. How the fuck are we ever supposed to make good decisions for them if we don't know what's on their minds? Teachers and staff can only tell us so much. Like, oh my goodness. Yeah.
For sure.
Oh, I have a good policy actually that outlines a good process for students to get elected during high school processes, actually. Yeah, I could share that with you, David, actually. I'm going to share that with you. Just thought of it.
This is what the podcast is for, making change.
Yeah,
live.
Exactly.
Live on air.
Live on air.
I'll say there's a bill that's dead and will continue to be dead for about 10 years because that's how the state house works in Massachusetts, to make student representatives have voting rights in Massachusetts, which I think would be a really interesting move. And I think it works best when you have training and elections for those positions. I know in Belmont, our student representatives have been elected by high schoolers as far back as I've seen, which is great to have. But again, they're subject to the same time constraints and training constraints that all student representatives are. And I believe the primary training requirements for a school board member, a fully fledged school committee member in Massachusetts, are just the ethics and the finance and the open meeting law rules. And so, you do have to sit down and learn, here's how a committee works. And, some of your emails can get public records requested. So
yes.
Yep, they can.
I'd literally be called to court for an entire day. Was it FOIA, whatever that was? And they literally just be like, did you write this? I'm like, yeah. And I knew it was going to get in public record. I actually did this intentionally. It's
they can.
Crazy.
Yep. So there's
have Markus, you ever sent an email accidentally from your school board email that was meant to be from your personal?
Yes, I've done it several times.
Yeah, me either.
I'm like, I shouldn't have done that. Dang it, wrong email. Or sometimes in the beginning, actually, it's public record. I went in a feud with my superintendent over email. And I later learned that could be public records requested, and I was like, okay, the public can know that.
Love it.
Yeah. Well, I could talk about this all day, but we have to get to the next part of the conversation. I don't know if any of us really have firsthand experience with this, but young people certainly have a valuable perspective on the issue of gun violence, which the CDC now says is the leading cause of death for people in our generation. From your experience in New York City, Josh, running as a young candidate in a city that has a crisis right now of gun violence, what kind of perspective did you bring to the table on that topic that older candidates just weren't talking about in the same way?
I don't know, man. There was unfortunately, I think we're all touched by this, and I'll never forget where I was in Bridgeport when my coworker lost their daughter in Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook's very close to Bridgeport, and being in the room when that being found out, and also running the school district on that day, right, where we had to lock down all of ours. Growing up in and around guns, I spent some time in Appalachia, and just never really made sense to me. I've had guns pulled on me. Actually canvassing in Newark, the epidemic, and I really don't like to do this, and maybe I shouldn't, but to Marcus's point, when it was saying there's a lot, right, with the planet on fire and these other things that we need to heal, every time I read a headline or hear a gunshot, I know it to be, and I'm a forever optimist, I promise y'all, I really am. And that's one of the most liberating things about me. I get to wake up in the morning and know that I will never be cynical. It would have already happened to me. But every time I see the headline, every time I hear about the guns, it is another shatter in the inevitable end of the American democracy. It is that is literally the thing that will have us lose this quote great experiment. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the lens that I was speaking about was the perspective I was bringing to it was more so an issue that was directly one I had experience with and was coming from, which was youth homelessness. And we were saying that we're the greatest city in the world, and at the same time, the person that was saying that was overseeing a government that 1 out of 10 of our children were showing up to schools every single day from a homeless shelter in the street. And I was talking about, as someone who spent time in and around that, what you witness mostly around violence and gun violence, and what that does to an impressionable brain, which at that age, when you see it, it's normalized. The only thing that you're going to do it is feel that it's normalized as well. So it's really trying everything to do in terms of creating safe environments for our young people. But yeah, this is one that I could literally, one of our co-founders, Nick Dellis, who went to law school with me here at Civics Unplugged, he's known that I'll talk about this issue all fucking night. It's the thing that I would quote blank on the hill for. But I'm more curious, y'all's younger perspective on this.
I'll say this about Massachusetts: we have strong gun laws and they work. We still have gun violence, but we have less than in a lot of places in this country. And one of the biggest gun-related causes of death for young people is suicide.
Yeah.
And so when a politician in Indiana says, stop talking about guns, we need to talk about mental health, maybe ask the question of where their intentions lie. But when a politician in Massachusetts says it, it's real. Because so much of gun violence is how it impacts communities, how it impacts the lives of young people, and just rips away members of our friend groups, our families. Now, I'm lucky enough to not have lost anyone to gun violence. But, I know people who have. And that can create a deep lasting impact on their ability to engage with their future, the education system, their, job and financial prospects, and just generally the direction they want to go in life is all thrown into disarray when you lose someone close to you. And that is something that gun violence does every day for people, young people especially, but people across this country. And when it comes to how each state, how each community can look to address it, I think one of the big things that Massachusetts needs to work on is on the mental health front, dealing with suicides and, homicide that is often a result of mental health crisis. And there's some exciting movement on that in the state legislature as well, with a new bill that would allow, so there's two versions of it, and they debate on whether or not educators and school psychiatrists should be able to have someone's ability to own a firearm removed. But it's those emergency petitions to allow someone who's experiencing a mental health crisis to not have access to a firearm, even if they normally would be allowed to. I think that's a key opportunity in Massachusetts. And it's also a way for us to continue having a conversation about how mental health impacts students and how mental health impacts learning, because I think that is one of the big obligations that our schools are going to have to undertake in the next decades, and something that I think young people's perspectives are especially useful on. So, I think, again, Massachusetts has done a lot to deal with gun violence, and a lot of it is working. And we're going to keep doing more. And we're going to keep doing more on the root causes of gun violence, issues like poverty, mental health, areas where, we have people who have access to a firearm because it is their right in America, and that's its own issue that we can debate. I would second that thumbs down, but unfortunately, I don't think I don't think school committee members are allowed to reinterpret the Constitution or change it. So we will see how we can act on that issue in a broader sense in the long term. But the actions we can take today are being taken in Massachusetts, and they're working. And I think if we look to states and communities like ours as an example, and then also think critically about what work still needs to be done on those preventative fronts to make sure that people are not put in a place where they would use a firearm, either against themselves or against other people. That is really the job. That's the task.
Yeah, gosh, thank you all for actually speaking about this topic, just because of some of the sensitivity around it. But yeah, I mean, that's, in my opinion, right? Two things were going on in my opinion, with like the two most un-American things were happening at the same time, which was student loan debt on millennials in your generation, coupled with the mental health crisis, coupled with taking life with firearms. And yeah, that's just had me swirling. So
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of young people right now who are in politics and are approaching this conversation really differently from older candidates. And I think what you pointed out, Angus, is so important. When young people think about the gun violence crisis, they think about mental health, they think about gun laws, they think about every single thing that prevents someone from going into your school, into our school where we actually are every day, and committing an act that seems unthinkable. But for older candidates, so much of this conversation is about police, and it stops there. And if we're actually going to solve this crisis, we're going to have to take the perspective of young people in this moment and say, how can we address every single root cause of this crisis that we see? And a lot of that is going to take federal action, which takes a long time. We saw the Safer Communities Act passed in the last Congress. This Congress has been the most unproductive Congress in the history of the United States, which, I don't know, is turning off a bunch of young people I see.
Is that a fact?
This is, yeah, the least productive Congress that has kicked out one Speaker of the House and is currently in a fight to kick out another. But all of this inaction from the federal government, I think, is generally making young people disillusioned with both political parties. And you see that in the fact that roughly 31% of young people right now identify as Democrats, despite having overwhelmingly liberal attitudes on most social and economic issues. 17% register as Republicans, and 52% register as independents, the largest of any age group. What do we think we can attribute this trend to, and is this concerning for progressive young elected officials going forward, or is it simply just how young people are identifying and not seeing themselves represented in either political party to the extent that we would like? And anyone can take this.
I think in simple terms, I think what is it, the words that George Washington used about the two political party system? Oh my God, I think he said it would be the end of American democracy if the two-party system ever came to light. I think it's the reason why he didn't run for president the third time. I think that's the reason why I think young people don't really like two options. They want to see more options, but also they don't want to see options. They want to see people who actually look like them and actually give a fuck about the issues they care about, right? You can be a Democrat, but you still can be very, very moderate or conservative on certain issues that young people care about. But you're still a Democrat. There are a lot of those Democrats around. And I think that those Democrats tend to turn off young voters. And then even on the Republican side, the same thing. You have your traditional Ronald Reagan, Mitt Romney Republicans. Those turn off young voters. But the Donald Trump Republicans turn on young voters of the right wing of the party. So I think young people just want to see people who give a fuck in short terms. There's not much more to say.
Absolutely. And I'll say this: the first time I turned in my pre-registration form when I was 16, to become a voter, I turned it in with unenrolled as the party designation, and that's our version of independent in Massachusetts. And I changed that in 2022, in January of 2022, to Democrat, not because I felt like the high-level Democratic Party candidates or party establishment was doing the right thing, but because I had a candidate that I was passionate about who was getting screwed over by the Democratic Party and the Democratic Party establishment, and we needed another vote. And that candidate was Senator Sonia Chang Diaz, who was running for governor of Massachusetts at the time.
Yeah, for sure.
And I ran at my town's caucus, our town Democratic Party caucus, to be a delegate to the state convention to go vote for her. And I skipped my high school graduation to show up in Worcester and put the first woman of color on the ballot for governor of Massachusetts.
Oh my
And
God.
the Belmont Democratic Town Committee endorsed her opponent, right?
Yep.
The people in
who may I add is a very, very well-known politician in our country, Maura Healey, now the governor of Massachusetts.
Yes.
And the former attorney general.
And that is a tension, right? But the reason I became a Democrat officially was never because I felt represented by the Democratic Party. It was because I didn't. And I think what's tough for a lot of young people is if you don't have time to do things like show up to caucuses and party committee meetings and conventions on your graduation day, and do all of this kind of behind the scenes work, you're not going to be in a place where the party is listening to you or looks like you. And that's got to be okay for most of the population, right? It's at the end of the day, most people are going to have to get on with their lives and not be as intensely involved as some activists. And that's fine, right? And we have to accept that. We have to understand why that's happening, and we have to accept that. But we have to make sure that these institutions, these establishments like the Belmont, like the Democratic Party as a whole, and like our party in Belmont, are reflecting those people who don't have time to show up.
Sure.
Because that's how we maintain support for the Democratic Party. I don't care what you're registered as. When I'm out knocking on doors, especially for a nonpartisan municipal office, when I'm out knocking on doors, I don't talk about party. When I see someone on Vote Builder is a Republican, I still knock on their door. We have a great conversation. Who knows where we'll end up.
Love to hear it.
But at the end of the day, people are going to vote how they're going to vote, and they're going to vote for candidates who make them feel seen. And when we have a party institution that is really bad at selecting candidates who make young people feel seen and heard and actually address the issues that young people want to see addressed, then we're not going to have a party establishment that draws in young people.
Oh, gosh.
That's how it's going to go.
This is such a genesis of why we started Civics Unplugged. So be still my heart in this conversation and seeing you all just like react to authenticity. And I don't want to out too much of this conversation, but I think some of you all know now Congressman Bowman is one of my closest friends on the planet Earth here, and y'all should have seen, right, of when I started to back and we started to build. Everyone was like, "You're not a Democrat. Like, what are you doing to us? Like, you're challenging a 24-year incumbent. Like, what you're not being a good Democrat, right?" It was just like, like what is this conversation right now? And just to see that, and I will call names too. Some of the stuff that is. So I love what you both. The theme is right. Like you all gravitate towards authenticity and folks that are just trying to do the right thing. But what I was two things. One, never meet your heroes. I was super young. And the person that I got to kick it with and know very well back then is now one of the top leaders in the Democratic establishment. And when I asked him why, when we had double majority, we didn't solve majority of the issues that we care about, and he said, well, if we solve majority, we wouldn't have a platform to fundraise off of. And like that stuck with me. And then two is like the moments of Mike Johnston, to me, is one of the greatest public servants. He's the mayor of Denver now. And he had the courage.
Not the Speaker of the House.
Yeah, he's yes. Don't edit that out. Don't edit that out. Start with the mayor of Denver, Mike Johnson. So he's the best. And he had the courage the last cycle during Trump and Biden. He was young and he went out ahead because no one was challenging in the Senate seat, and he was just knocking it out of the park. He was going to be the next United States senator, and God, does our country need him. But then Hickenlooper decided, who I'm sure is a fine guy, that he needed a job. And he came off the bench and was like, all right, here I come. I am, and the whole apparatus got behind him. And it was so disappointing. Like when Mike did the right thing, right? But I was reading him the riot act of like, Mike, you're serving the party right now more than the country. You're serving the party more than like your own tenacity and authenticity. Like, what are we doing? And there's that whole like, well, we just have to like win now in this sense. So yeah, just I hope this trend continues with younger generations just gravitating towards authenticity. Yeah, my generation now, when I tell everyone, like, I'm not a Democrat, and they're like, oh my God, you've turned into a Republican. I'm like, no. Life is more complex than that. Like, anyway.
I have one more question on this topic, and then we'll start to wrap up here. How can candidates who are part of Gen Z get other members of Gen Z who might be unenrolled or independent if you're not in Massachusetts to vote for offices that are other than the presidency when the presidency is taking up so much room in the political discussion this year, especially because there's such an important race, but there are so many other younger candidates who can really inspire people to turn out and vote in a way that will represent their values if they voted not just based on the top of the ticket. How can Gen Z candidates and elected officials do that?
Well, the first question I ask when I talk to a young person who is complaining about the presidential election, which happens a lot, there's a guy from Georgia who sits 2 seats behind me in my U.S. government class, and when he says, "What do you think of RFK Jr.?" I lose my mind because he's the one person I know whose presidential vote might actually matter. And, the conversation that I like to have there is just ask, what do you care about? What's the issue? What do you want to see? And then we find the level of government where that actually gets dealt with. And 9 times out of 10, it's nothing to do with what Joe Biden's doing. There is nothing Joe Biden could do tomorrow to fix most of the issues that young people care about. Whether it's housing affordability, which is really an issue of local zoning commissions and state legislatures, or student debt relief is one that Biden has more control over. But, we talk about issues like, the student debt relief is something that he should be able to handle with an executive order, but he tried and the court struck it down. So we have to talk about things like court reform and making good judicial appointments, which comes back to the national legislature and making sure we have, senators and representatives who are doing good work. And, so often you can find a level of government that person didn't know they cared about, but they do now, and an elected official or a candidate for office who that young person didn't know they cared about, but they do now. And that is where I just try to direct that energy, because chances are, if you have an issue, someone else is working on it, and they're working on it hard. And that is so much more important than the frustration that we all kind of feel at some point with that top of the ticket, because the president makes a lot of decisions. And if you want to get excited and upset about all of them, then you can do that with your life. But, it's not going to be the issues that you care about on the ground. And so, I just start with that question of what's the issue you care about? And then we find a place to put that passion and put that energy that actually is constructive to the movement, and make sure that, in 4 years, we can potentially have a candidate for president who you do support, or a candidate for U.S. Senate who you really do support, and make sure that that is the direction that we're going in as a country, because that's the power that young people have. we're only going to grow as a part of the electorate. That's the nice thing. Every year, another however many million young people roll into the voter rolls and can start showing up to the polls and making their voices heard. And as long as we find the issues and the elections that are going to matter for those young people, we can direct that energy in a really powerful way.
Yeah. Well said. I think the short term for me is that whether it's the closest power to the community is your local school board and your local city council. And then obviously your county commissioner or county supervisor, wherever you're at. Those people make very important decisions, which is why I think I get mad about how we talk about how education doesn't really teach young people about what goes on around them. It teaches them what goes on outside of where they actually live and work and play.
Yep.
So I think that goes back to, we have to actually teach young people and teach students in our public education system that, hey, you should go to your school board meeting. Our school board members should be in the damn classrooms actually talking to students, actually trying to educate them. And their superintendents should be doing that as well to ensure that the board is known to the community. When I got on my school board, people sometimes get a little frustrated on this. I was like, we own this big billboard, this big digital billboard. Why is there not a billboard? I love it. We're talking about our staff, students, but why are we not mentioning what this governing board does and how people can interact with us as a board? So we took a group photo and now we're up on that big billboard and explaining about what our governing board does and how people can connect with us. And that is information is so important when in local government is so under people's noggins until they actually want to know about it, until one of their kids are getting bullied and they have to move up the case to appeal the discipline case. Then they'll reach out to their governing board or their school board. If they are having trouble with their neighbor regarding a plant or a tree, they're going to reach out to their city council, let them know they want that tree gone. So these are the issues I think that people shouldn't have to reach out to their city council members or school board members just because there's an issue going on. They should actually build that, because that's how you build community power, and that's how you build long-term leaders, right? Leaders in office should be building other leaders, not just building power for themselves. And I think that is what we have seen historically with older people. They don't want to build leaders because that creates competition. They see young people as competition because we're going to be around for 30 to 40 years in these offices if we really want to. We don't have 20 to 30 years. We didn't retire with a 6 figures pension, paid off house, and a Bentley out in the front. We actually get passionate about these issues, and so I think that's just what I think. Yeah.
All right. Well, that was an amazing conversation today. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening, and thank you to our incredible panelists. That was one of our best episodes so far, and certainly one of our longest. So thank you for bearing with us and sitting through all this.
Great conversation.
I'm just going to ask one more question. Where can our audience go if they want to get involved in your race, Angus, and in the work that you do, Josh and Markus?
Well, so I'll say this: we are 4 days out from election day in my race. So I don't know when this is going to get posted, but there's probably
make it quick.
All right. Well, if you live nearby Belmont, Massachusetts, if you're one of the 1% of people watching who does, reach out to us on social media. We are doing door knocking, sign holding, all that jazz. We can also set you up with phone banking if you're further away, and we will take any help we can get. You can find us on basically any social media platform at Angus JBA. Or if you happen to use Facebook, we're on there too as Angus Abercrombie. There aren't that many people named Angus Abercrombie, so I should be relatively easy.
Yeah, I mean, get involved in Civics Unplugged. I mean, this is and I'll be very quick on this, and I'll sound a little confident in a second, but we're actively becoming the largest democracy building movement in the entire world, and we're just getting started, and something that we got to get better at. And I think you all can be a testament to this as well. Until we kind of met in person, and now we're getting to know each other a little bit better. we would have never started this thing if collectively we as a team, we can get to anyone. Our network is second to none. And what we got to get better at is having the young folks who are building this with us understand that more of the capacity in which we can expand this. But yeah, I remember looking at Nick and I was like, I don't know how long it's going to last, but we know the right people. So let's start this thing and build this community. So yeah, get involved with Civics Unplugged for sure.
All right. Well, thank you again so much for listening. This has been Pod Save the Youth. I'm your host, David Seaton.
I'm Markus Anasaros.